We'll then go next to, as it is titled, the Operational Framework, DC3 FHSU. And we'll have Clark speak to this. I would like to say on behalf of the board, we really appreciate all the work that's gone into this. You know, as Mike had said, some of these task force committees or work groups have not yet had the chance to meet together, but at least to have a start on questions or on issues or items that come up from our faculty and our work groups. I think that'll be much helpful to the process. So, Clark, I'll just let you kind of go through.
Before you get into this, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that at some point in time there has to be a finance committee.
True.
So we might agree that we might keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So that's really going to be where the rubber meets the road.
Absolutely. Add one additional work group in the future. Clark, I'll let you go forward with this. All the board members have had this opportunity to look through and go over, so I'll let you handle it as you wish.
Okay.
Interrupt questions or let you go through.
All right, and so some of the remarks I will be making will probably be more for the TV audience and for the room, since, again, some of you all, since the board members already have a copy of the document. I want to start off by saying that the document, this paper, has taken on a kind of weird life of its own. Entirely unwarranted reputation. It's as if I would sometimes feel like I would walk into my office and find this other thing sitting in my chair, this white paper thing. It's taken on this reputation, I'm afraid, of being some kind of an oppositional document, as if we were drafting Thomas Paine's Right of Man or common sense papers again, and that's certainly not its intent. Let me remind you that back in March, when this topic first came to the board, you asked the president to gather information and opinion from faculty and staff regarding this possible merger. And Dr. Woodburn asked me then to conduct that activity. And so what you have in front of you here is not, again, a flat-out opposition, although I have some personal concerns. It is instead a framework I hope that the board can use to begin, if it chooses, to structure its discussion as it begins to develop and clarify its positions regarding this possible merger. And I hope will also serve as a kind of ongoing record of concerns and suggestions that you might be getting from faculty and staff. Obviously, the board is free to agree, to disagree, to use or not use the information, but I would certainly urge the board to try to use the papers as a way of beginning to clarify its position, even if the clarification is in direct opposition to what we've written here. Is that making sense so far? Okay. Now, the papers developed, the framework developed out of a series of meetings, as Mike was saying earlier, that occurred over a period of time since March. Some of them, the large special committee, which consisted of faculty members, staff, community members, and then smaller committees, particularly the benefits committee and a faculty committee. I have also been involved in numerous individual conversations with people all across campus. I've received emails, phone calls, and so what the paper is, while not definitive and not necessarily complete, it does represent what I think is a broad consensus of information that the board can use to clarify its positions. Now, the document, as you read, covers a great many different topics, far too many for us to cover tonight. And there are many topics in here which are subject for further discussion, and many topics which will arise later, which are not included tonight. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is to try to focus on a couple of what I think are very basic issues, which are related to the structure and the governance of this possible merger affiliation, because those issues are so central to anything we can try to do moving forward. Let's just go back to something really very basic. The board is authorized to levy taxes in the name of Dodge City Community College. And that role appears to be very central to Fort Hayes' provisions. But the implications of that become somewhat more complicated when you try to work it out in practical terms. It means that some entity called Dodge City Community College must exist in order for the board to levy taxes in the name of Dodge City Community College. And let me add too, gently, if there is no Dodge City Community College, there is no Dodge City Community College Board of Trustees. So the board needs to be very careful how it constitutes this entity so that it can retain its taxing authority and its other operational authorities, and also to clarify its accreditation status with the Higher Learning Commission. Now, Glenn will be the very first person to tell you that I am not an attorney, but I have tried to work carefully through Kansas state legislation, and I cannot find anywhere where Kansas law defines explicitly what a community college consists of. There is no list which says a community college must have these parts. Am I right, Glenn?
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me. So in some respects, then, the board is free to define what this new entity is going to be. But again, I think we need to be careful as we move forward. The Kansas state legislation does define terms of a merger between two community colleges, but it does not define the definition, it does not define terms for a merger between a community college and a Regents institution. And so absent of those guidelines from the state, I think perhaps the possible structure for us to consider are the provisions of the Higher Learning Commission, since accreditation is so closely linked to whatever we might do. And in the document that I gave you on the third page are the three possibilities or the three situations that I think we have when it comes to keeping accreditation and keeping the college's, the board's taxing authority. One possibility would be to make no change whatsoever, simply stay the way we are and operate as we have all along since 1935, working with Fort Hayes in a more close partnership. Second possibility, though, would be to, and this is again listed in the page 3, would be to be accredited as a component within Fort Hayes' affiliation with the Higher Learning Commission. That would mean that most authority, operational authority, would rest with Fort Hayes. Here's where I think we have to be extremely careful, because there are certain kinds of questions that come up that have to be resolved, I think, before the board goes too much further. Can Dodge City's Board of Trustees retain its taxing authority on Fort County if it is legally established as a component of an institution which is legally established in a separate county? Am I making sense there? We also have to be careful, excuse me, because I've heard a lot of loose, somewhat kind of careless, undefined talk about, well, Dodge City Community College will simply become a second campus, a branch campus of Fort Hayes. But again, the problem is, what will that entity be? And I would remind you again that if there is no Dodge City, then there is no board. If there is no board, there is no taxing authority. And it might require some kind of a special election, possibly, to establish a new taxing entity if this second other entity is not constituted as it is now. The third possibility again, I'm looking at the accreditation possibilities from the Higher Learning Commission, would be to accredit as a separate component, but a component which is affiliated with Fort Hays State University. And if, again, you'll look at page 3 in your document, that would mean that the college would retain a number of authorities that it doesn't have. I've also given you, if you look back here, you should have a document. Correct. That is titled Policy Title, Components of Accredited or Candidate Affiliated Institutions. If we are accredited separately, but in affiliation with Fort Hays, then the board would retain the powers to retain, maintain substantial financial administrative independence, hire a chief administrative officer, initiate and sustain its own academic programs, grant degrees and certificates. That seems to me, personally, the situation which would best fit the college right now. I'd like to end with 2 recommendations before we start with questions. The first one is a little tricky, but remember, I'm the one who's been here so dang long, I get to ask these things. The first recommendation is that I think the board very seriously needs to clarify the status of the vote that it took on March the 25th, 2014, because there is a great deal of confusion when you hear people talking as to what the meaning of that vote was. For some people, the intent of the vote was to simply enter into a discussion regarding a possible merger. For others, the intent was to initiate a merger. And it would be very helpful, I think, for the board to clarify what that meant, either through a new vote or through some kind of statement, public statement. I think it would also be very important, my second recommendation is that the board move quickly to try to determine what kind of legal status it wants to have with Fort Hays post-affiliation. Are we going to be a subcomponent of Fort Hays, a simple second campus, a branch campus, with Fort Hays retaining all of the authorities? Or are we going to retain ourselves as a separate entity affiliated with Fort Hays, but with our own operational authorities? It does make a difference how the board decides that legal status. I think it makes a difference in its taxing authority, its accreditation, and in the ongoing discussions that we are beginning with Fort Hays, such as Mike was just talking about. It's going to make a difference if we are simply a subcomponent or if we are separate in our own way. It's going to make a difference in terms of things like supervision, evaluation, curriculum development, and it finally makes a difference, I think, also in faculty staff morale, because there is a real need to alleviate, I think, some high levels of uncertainty that are going to exist over the summer. Okay, so that's the end of the major formal speech. Do you have questions, comments?
Continue.
Okay. Could we interject here the attorney's opinion about that vote, which he has indicated to us?
The vote in March that was taken by the board? Well, as the drafter of the motion, it was my understanding the intent is that the board would go forward with discussing this concept, the concept that Fort Hays State had identified in what is called the white paper. The white paper was out. The board was in a position to decide if it was going to further pursue it. And so what I understood the purpose of the motion to be was to further explore that concept. That was the intent of the drafter of the motion. It's gotten varying interpretations.
But it wasn't
I think
a
it's
vote of
important that we look at the alternative. We really were faced with a dilemma. We had this proposal that come before us. We didn't have a lot of time to really study it and analyze it. But basically, we had before us a yes or no vote. If we had voted no, that would have been the end of it. They'd be having this discussion over Garden City or Fort Scott today instead of here. So there's a lot of work to do. The white paper has really two issues that I see that we really need to zero in on. One is it talks about enabling legislation. And enabling legislation would meet these concerns that Clark talked about as far as levying the taxes and these kinds of things. So that's extremely important. The second important item from the white paper is the operating agreement. The operating agreement between the trustees and Fort Hays State University to spell out the nuts and bolts of all these questions that have been raised here tonight and heretofore. So we have a lot of work to do. We've got a year or so to get all this worked out. I think we'll just get to work and do it. But I don't think we want to, we've heard from the community.
Morris, can I interject something?
Sure.
I have never heard of anybody trying to do this before.
Never neither.
This is a brand new concept, and we made it very clear, this board made it clear, I made it clear to the regents and to Ed Hammond that this college, and we didn't know what it was going to be called or how it functioned or how it was, but it had to remain intact, doing the functions that it's doing now in the community. And we all agree with that. And so based on that, it was my understanding in working with Glenn, he wrote that draft, and what you all voted on was to look at the concept. It wasn't complete acceptance of it. Look at it, see where we can go with it. Take it to a point that we get to a point that we will come to agreement on this is how it's done, and then this board will vote on whether they accept it or not. That's how I understood
Yeah,
it.
when we vote on the operating agreement, that's,
Then
and the legislation passes legislation.
And they pass the legislation, and then this board agrees on what it should be. And that gave us a chance to look at it and maybe create a new animal that is head and shoulders above anything we've ever seen.
That's right.
I like your use of the term animal, because this animal does not exist at this present
It does
time.
not exist.
And so that's why there's this, obviously, a lot of discussion and thought going into how is this going to look. And I really agree with Morris that the operating agreement is going to be the essential component of where we fit as a board, where this whole concept, how it works. And again, there's going to have to be legislation that does not exist at this time passed to probably make this thing a reality. So that's another one of these various steps down the road. Just because of our action does not mean that's going to happen.
That's right.
But again, that's the step that we're headed towards, seeing if that legislation.
And I talked to all of you board members. I've talked to you probably more than you talk to each other. And every one of you want one thing, that's this college, to serve this community of Dodge City as it now is to remain basically intact. And every one of you told me that. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Well, back to the question about the vote. What people have said to me is they think we hurriedly approved that white paper. And that isn't what we did. It was not an approval.
Far from it.
The white
The
paper.
white
being-
paper is really a
Yeah,
concept.
concept and a framework. I think we all agree, I know we all agree on that this is what has to be hashed out and hammered out over this next year, whatever the time frame is.
The only thing that I have heard from the board, from Regent Bangeter and his discussion with the other regents is they don't want an additional college. It's got to be one college.
I've talked to some of the staff of the Board of Regents, and they say, we can have differential funding, we're gonna keep the college intact, we're willing to negotiate, we're willing to develop after we get this thing funding an operational agreement. And I bet Regents and Andy wanted that. So I feel, we just gotta keep charging. But boy, you gotta give this guy a lot of credit. He has really found some key elements that we have to deal with. He's done a great job on what?
The elements that will have to be dealt with in the operating agreement and the enabling legislation.
Jason and I were talking, for instance, Morris, the worst thing you could do to the city of Dodge City and its citizens is double their tuition. We just cannot do that.
Not gonna happen.
Not gonna happen.
Differential tuition and all those things. And again, some of those concerns do need to be laid to rest, and misperceptions, misconceptions kind of laid to rest that that is not our intent. Everyone on this board knows that that is a part of what makes this community college function, as most other community colleges do, in terms of access and affordability. So
Forgive me for jumping in.
that's all right. I think being competitive with our counterparts in this area is essential, and I think we can do that. Really.
There's a few complaints already. From some of our counterparts.
Yeah, as might be expected. So again, as Morris has said, I think it's also a key thing to keep in mind for all of us on the board and even those watching, that there will come a time down the road, again, assuming all these other steps occur in order, or whatever order they're to be, that this board will have the opportunity to vote on an operating agreement to see how this thing functions. And, hopefully by that time, you have these things ironed out and questions answered, so it's not, well, we don't know what we're getting into. That's the point at which it's going to be really important when you decide this is what we're going to be doing. So there's a lot of work to be done. And this operational framework that Clark and others have put together provides part of that framework. And as he stated, it's not exhaustive, it's not complete, and it's not intended, which we appreciate, as a manifesto saying this is the way we think it has to be. But it's up to us to look at that information and get it worked out between all the rest of us.
Well, I really appreciated Clark's research.
Yeah.
There was a lot of time and work in that. It's obvious. We thank you again.
Oh, yeah, you haven't heard the last from me, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Clark. I don't know if a motion of some sort would be in order for the board to ask administration to,
We didn't have it as an action
No,
item.
it's a discussion item.
maybe next month, we ought to be able to
We need to see
think
what the
about.
Regents are gonna do.
Yeah,
let's
That's
wait, see
coming
what
up
the
at the
Regents
next
do.
Regents meeting.
Well,
We'll
it
be
may,
there.
it may not matter
And we also,
what we decide.
Absolutely.
we need to see the response that President Tompkins gives to the council of presidents, or whatever that group is. The questions.
I'm sorry, guys, I couldn't answer those questions.
Well,
Those are some questions that are
I thought
unanswered.
originally they were asking us to respond.
Oh,
to them.
no.
I didn't read it.
They were directed to the
But
Regents.
then I figured, well, if I send it on to you, you'd be interested to see what you have to say.
Well, it's an interesting discussion in the state,
Yeah.
and it should be discussed.
Those are good questions,
Yeah.
really. What's the
think
role
that-
of the tech authority?
I think the biggest thing that they're upset about was the fact that we have a whole bunch of tough procedures just to get a program in. If Danny wants to put in a technical program, it has to go for everybody in the state. You have to got a review period, a question period, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this thing just bypassed all that, and they're upset about it, and I don't blame them.
Danny doesn't have governor after his name.
Yeah, that's true.
Doesn't have Stanford.
Some of those comments from the other boards were they were very careful to say that this was not intended as a slap in the face,
But,
but, big but, so. I guess it was us.
Well, it's a threat, you gotta admit that.
I have talked to a lot of people in this community, and a lot of people have talked to me. And if we do this right, I think you're really gonna get a lot of support from the people in Dodge City. So we gotta do it right. We gotta
Well,
set
some
it
of them are
right.
still waiting to see what it's gonna be. They aren't ready to say yes or no yet.
All right, any other quick?
I think this discussion we've had tonight and getting it on TV is gonna answer a lot of questions for people. And, one of the leaders in the community told me it was 25% for, 25% again, and 50% who don't know what's going on yet. And, well, Clark's report and Glenn straightened me out. That's public information. I've released that to several people. And I think good reporting from the Globe. And I think we can get this information out and inform the people in this community and help them make a great decision.
Are there any specific questions for Clark? You got tired of standing up there.
My back hurts. Yeah.
We appreciate your work.
Thank you.
just remember, we can back out at any time. If we don't like the way the operating agreement is negotiated, we'll have a whole lot more leverage at that time than we got now. We don't have much leverage yet, but
I've never seen anything like this in my whole career. I mean, this is a new deal, and we've got to go as far as we can go with it and make it work, in my opinion.
I've been in education administration for half a century, and I haven't seen anything quite like it.
That's why it's gotta be done right.
All right. Thanks for that discussion. We'll move on.